Right, welcome everyone. This is now session 2 of rendering and animation. Now in session 1, I introduced the unit, went through the learning schedule, weekly schedule, talked about the assessment tasks, and you started an exercise called Rendering Concepts. Which was designed or intended to be a bit of a reintroduction or a warm-up for the unit. All of you have done it before in another Revit unit, so it's just really a refresher, but it's just a good lead-in to this particular unit. Now, we're not going to spend any more time on that exercise today. I'm going to go in and we're going to have a very close look at the ways in which we assign materials in Revit and the materials themselves and what makes up a material. What is a material? So that's what we're going to cover today. In the coming weeks, we're going to obviously go through a few exercises where you actually get some practice at creating and managing materials. Now, this is all I guess a lead up to the first assessment task, where you will have to assign materials to building elements in the assessment task, and you'll also be required to create a collection of materials, custom materials, and you will be required to create a library and manage that library and populate that library with your custom materials. Okay, so up front, it's not an easy process. Working with materials is quite complex, and I guess hopefully with the going through the next few sessions, working with materials and creating them, you'll get a better understanding of what they are and how they're managed and created. So just with the exercise that you started last week, I would like everyone to complete that, and I would like everybody to email me the 4 rendered images that you create from that exercise. Okay, so I need you to email me the images, and that includes external students. So the images, I believe, are the exterior daytime external, the exterior nighttime external, there's an internal view daytime and an internal view nighttime. So they're the 4 images that I need from you. Okay, so if you've done that, all well and good. If you haven't completed the exercise, I will get you to do that in your own time. All right. Now, on the Learn site, we now have topic 2, Revit materials. I've also opened up this topic on the other website, Digital Design, for the certificate for students. So it's identical on both sites. We start with the topic introduction. So essentially what we're going to do is not so much go through an exercise, but I will get you to actually download a Revit project file that I've made available to you. And as we talk about the methods of material assignment, we'll actually go through. I'll get you to actually work with me and actually go through the process, and I'll talk about the ways in which we assign materials, what a material is, how it's made up, what it's used for. So I guess the thing, as a topic introduction, materials in Autodesk Revit represent actual materials such as concrete, timber and glass. We'll use the word timber, not wood. So these materials can be applied to parts of a design to give the objects a realistic appearance and behaviour. Okay, in some design contexts, the appearance of an object is most important, so the materials have detailed appearance properties such as reflectivity and surface texture. In other contexts, physical properties of a material such as yield strength and thermal conductivity are more important. Now the thing is that a material in Revit is something that we assign to building objects. And the material itself gives that object a number of properties. Now, if we go through and have a look at the four basic properties, they are graphical, appearance, thermal, and physical. Now, without a material being assigned to a building element, such as a wall or a roof or a floor, that building element is said to be generic. It has no identity, it has no appearance properties, it's really quite bland. Okay, so the material aspect or the material itself is vitally important to the identity of that particular building element or part element. Now, when I say part element, what do I mean? So what building elements are divided into parts?
Reinforced concrete. Like masonry, walls?
Yeah, things like walls. So what are the parts of a wall? A complex wall?
You have one skin or two skins.
Yeah, so you have a wall that's made up of brick and timber frame, so it's made up of layers.
Does furniture come into it?
Yes, it does. Yes, things like furniture. So if you have a chair, for instance, that's made up of it could be timber seat and back, and it could have a steel tubing frame. So it's made up of parts. Yeah, that's good. So it's the material itself that's assigned to the object or parts of the object that really give that object its appearance. When we talk about graphical, what do we mean by graphical? Yeah, what it looks like, but more specifically, it's colour. So when we talk about graphical, we're talking about the shaded colour of an object. So within graphical, what are the graphical aspects? What are the material itself? What does it provide graphically? Not so much. That's more appearance. Okay, so appearance, we're talking about the reflectivity. That the shining, the gloss. If it's got a texture, the actual real world appearance. So if it's a brick material, we can actually see the bricks and mortar, that type of thing. If it's timber, we can see the grain and so forth. But going back to graphical, graphical really is or determines the shaded colour and also the patterning. Okay, so you might actually include a surface pattern or a cut pattern. So, for instance, in your floor plans, when you're looking at brick veneer construction, you can see the diagonal hatching inside the masonry part of the wall, which indicates that it is masonry, and that's what we deem a cut pattern. So the other aspects of the material, thermal and physical. Now the graphical and appearance are hard-coded, so they're built in. They are there regardless. Thermal and physical properties are optional, so you can actually add them or delete them as required. So, as I say, the graphical graphics characteristics that control how the material looks in a non-rendered, such as the colour it displays in a shaded project view, the colour and pattern that display on the surface of an element, the colour and fill pattern that display when the element is cut. The material itself also contains identity information about the material, and if you're going all out to create a really complex or a really detailed material, you would include a very good description of the material. And again, we come back to the material representing a real world product. So it might have a trade name in there, you know, a brand or a trade name. You perhaps might include a link to the website where the material comes from, the manufacturer's website. Okay. You can build in a cost. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever created a material takeoff in Revit, where you've done calculations on, you know, per square metre, but that is possible, and you can actually build in a cost per square metre of that material, and that information is held inside the material definition. So we have physical properties used for structural analysis and thermal properties used for energy analysis. So the physical and thermal, we can actually plug in very specific information about that product's performance in energy, for energy rating, and also how it performs in a structural sense. So that's, you know, very, very specific information, and that information can be extracted in other ways as well from the material. Okay, so the material itself is, you know, said to be a container. You know, it's a vitally important aspect of the building element. So we're going to we're going to have a look at the ways materials are assigned in Revit, and have a look at materials, the material itself, I guess the material dialogue, the different parts of the dialogue, and just get a bit of a feel, a bit of a sense of how we manage materials when we're working with Revit elements. Now, what I'll get you to do is open up this link here to what we call Chapter 4, Revit Materials. Now, this link, this is a chapter that's taken from the resource that I spoke about last week, which is Interior Design using Autodesk Revit 2019. Now, this is a sample chapter that is provided by the publisher for this particular book, and it fits in with what we're doing quite nicely, because the entire chapter is devoted to Revit materials. So it's going to give us a lot of information, some pre-learning, and it's going to provide us with a series of exercises to do, which we're going to have a look at over the coming sessions. So on the first page there, Introduction to Using Materials in Revit. I've more or less covered, I guess, just very briefly, the different parts of a material, what a material actually does for us, and what information it provides. And I guess the thing is that a material, in terms of its appearance and I guess the general information that's contained in a material, is really up to us. So if we're building a material from scratch, we need to build that material and put in as much information as possible provide it with the best appearance asset that we can, that will reflect the real world material that it represents. And I guess we're talking about appearance. So appearance here is really required, or its purpose is to represent the building element both for rendering, if we change our visual style to realistic, that's where the appearance really comes in. So the appearance itself, and we'll sort of go into this a bit more thoroughly, the appearance itself is derived from a photograph of the product, or it can be, or it can be artificially derived within the material itself. So if you're setting out to create a wall type with a specific block or brick or texture coat, it could be Hebel, for instance, then you would go off and look for a very, very good photograph example of that particular product and incorporate that into the material itself. Now, the photographs that you use to create a material on that basis are known as texture maps. So you can go off and you get them from anywhere, basically. So you just do a search on the web. Quite often the manufacturer will have some very good examples of their products, as in photographs, which you can use as well. So, as I say, we're going to work through this chapter, and eventually we'll actually sort of have a look at later in the chapter where we actually go through the process of creating custom materials. But to start with, we're going to have a look at the ways in which we assign materials in Revit, and this will have, I guess, a direct impact or a direct bearing on how you, I guess, work through the assessment task, or how you work with materials in the assessment task. And I guess, unfortunately, by the time students get to the assessment task, they tend to have forgotten all this. And they're really, some, not all students, but some students think they just have no idea how to assign materials effectively. And what I would suggest is that when you get to the assessment task, if you're still unsure about this, come back to this recording, okay? Or come back to this chapter. So we're going to go through and have a look at the ways we assign materials, and ultimately I'm going to say, okay, well, this is the way we can assign materials, but this is the way I suggest you do it. All right. Sometimes the ways we assign materials are not always the best and most effective or productive. Okay, so in assigning materials, it's working with materials, you need to do this fairly quickly, and it needs to be in a logical way. We'll just come back to this this chapter shortly, but what I'd like you to do is just go back to the Learn site, and in conjunction with, as I'm sort of talking about the ways we assign materials within a Revit project, I'd like you to have a bit of hands-on yourself. So what I'm going to get you to do is actually just download this Revit project called Revit Materials Practice. So if you can just download it and then open it up in Revit and just have it ready. Because it was produced in a previous version of Revit, it will upgrade. Okay, so the project itself will be familiar to you. It's the project that you did, one of the exercises you did in Revit Introduction, but it's perfect for what we want to do today in terms of just going through the different ways of assigning materials. So we'll just have that ready. Now, just coming back to this chapter 4, this PDF, I'll come back to the ways that we assign materials, but I just wanted to, if we just move forward, I guess, to what we call exercise 4-2, which is on page 4-8 here. I just want to have a look at the material browser in a little more detail, talk about that, and then we'll go back and have a look at the ways in which materials are assigned in Revit. Now, to access the material browser, how do you do it? So if I can, I'll get you to open up the material browser. So going through the rendering concepts exercise that you did, you had some initial experience with modifying a material. You created a material that you used for the framework on the windows, the curtain windows, and you also created, I believe, a material for the concrete slab, didn't you? Okay. So in working with materials, we go to the Manage tab and we click the Materials button here. Now, whether you're working on your projects here at TAFE or at home, I would suggest that you just take the time to perhaps make some minor changes to the material browser so that it makes a bit more sense, it's a bit more usable. Now, the browser itself is divided up into, on the left here we've got this is the browser part of the dialog. On the right hand side we've got I guess the different aspects of the material, the things that we can change with the material, such as identity, graphics and appearance, or in some cases some materials will have the physical and thermal parts to them as well. Okay, so as I said previously, all materials will have identity, graphics and appearance, but not all will have physical and thermal data. Now, one of the things I'll get you to do is, if you go up to this button here, which we call Show or Hide the Library Panel. So click that one. It will, in this lower part here, you'll actually see the library panel appear. Just just find the division between the two and just move that up a little bit higher so you can see it down here. Now, if necessary, if it makes it easier, just stretch this dialogue out. So see how you can, move the different parts to make them a little bit larger and easier to read. Now, the thing is that, so looking at the different parts of this this dialogue now, we've got up here, this area here, we've got a collection of materials here, but where are these materials, or what are these materials?
Where we have downloaded software, this library.
Well, the materials in this area here are the materials that are currently residing in the Revit project. They're called project materials or in-document materials. So that, when you start a new Revit project, using the architectural template, for instance, there's going to be a very small collection of materials that are in that project already. And you'll actually see them up in this area here. Okay. Again, if I click this button here and close the bottom portion, this is still the list of materials in the current project. Now, the materials down in this section here, this is what we call the library of materials. And the library of materials, or it's an area where we access material libraries. When you install Revit, during the installation process, a library of materials will be downloaded and installed and linked, providing everything goes okay. And the library itself, you'll see here, and the only library that's available by default in 2019 is one called AEC Materials. I think in previous versions you might have had a second library there, but there's only one at the moment, or one now in these current versions of Revit. Can everyone see AEC Materials? Okay. Sometimes when you start Revit and load a project, for some reason you might not be able to see this library, or it might be there but it'll have a little exclamation mark next to it. And you may not be able to see the different, categories or classes of materials down here. So as you click on each of these classes or classifications, you'll see the materials here on the right hand side within those classifications. Now, this area here, as the name suggests, it's a library. So if you are looking for a material to use in your project, you can come down to this area here, go into a specific area, find the material that best fits that you'd like to use, and then essentially what you do is you transfer it from this area here to the area above, and essentially by doing that you actually take it from the library, the external library, and put it into your project. It's a bit like the concept of loading a family into a project. So in this case you're actually loading materials in from an external source. So, for instance, if I want some type of flooring, maybe I want this terrazzo. So highlight the material here. There's an arrow here. Add material to document. So if I want to use that material to assign it to a building element, I have to first add it to my project and then I can assign it. Now, so in the coming sessions, you'll be creating your own materials through a series of exercises, and you'll also be creating your own library. Now, if you create your own library, it's going to sit down here in this part here, okay? So if you create your own library and you actually, give it your first name, for instance, it's going to appear here, and I'll just collapse this. It'll actually appear here as an additional library. So once it's created, and once you start creating your custom materials, you can then transfer those materials into that library. And that library then becomes portable. So I'm not going to show you where the library is, where the library is held at the moment, but it becomes a separate file and it can be transferred to a different installation of Revit. Okay. Now, the third scenario is that you can actually acquire or download libraries from manufacturers. So some manufacturers actually have created a library for Revit. They've created all of the classes or categories based on the products that they produce or sell, and they've actually created materials of those products. And I will, in a future session, show you exactly where you can get hold of a library that will allow you to, or does contain, steel products. So products like corrugated iron, trim deck, iron products that can be used for roofing and fencing. And all of their products, for instance, are actually produced. So, for instance, corrugated iron, what they do is they have a category or a classification of corrugated iron or custom ore, and they provide a material of each of the standard ColourBond colours for corrugated iron. Same with trim deck. They also supply or provide another category where you've just got flat colours, so colour swatches of all the ColourBond colours that you can assign to fascia, gutters, downpipes and so forth, any steel products like that, to match the roof coverings or the fencing. So all of this is built into a library. You download the library, you put it into a specific location on your computer, and you link it back into Revit, and you can use it immediately.
So you don't have to, like you say, from the AEC materials library, do you have to go and put it in the project materials file before you can put it into another library? Or can you just transfer between libraries?
That's a good question. What we've done in the past is actually sort of put it up into our project first and then transferred it from the project to a separate library. Okay. You may be able to transfer from one library to another direct, but I haven't done that, but it's a good question. Yeah. All right. So, as I say, when you're working with Revit, when you're working with a material browser, just make sure you have this section open and available. The thing is that when you are, I guess, looking for a material, the quickest approach or the best approach would be to actually do a search for it. So up the top here, you've got a search box. So you can type in, say you're looking for some sort of tile, type in the word tile, and Revit will give you all of the materials that have the word tile in it up here that are in the project, and it will also give you some materials here that also meet that search criteria. So, and it just limits or restricts the list of categories or classifications here. So in each of these, you've got a material that contains the word tile. Now, what you can do in conjunction with typing in a keyword is that you can actually, in this drop list here, project materials all, this drop list here, you can actually drill down and select a particular category. So again, if you're looking for tiles, you might perhaps clear that search keyword and just come down here and have a look for, you've got masonry, ceramic, there's ceramic there, so that'll sort of give you a tile perhaps, if there is one. If you're looking for any type of paint or paints, any type of masonry, for instance, it will then just search by what we call class or classification. Now, when you are creating material, and by the way, if I can direct you to these icons here. If you're creating a new material, this is where you can. This is one of the areas you can do it. Create new material. So if you click that, and I'll just clear this. Go back to all here. Choose create new material. So there's a default new material. And I guess the thing is that when you do set out to create materials, as you know, what's the quickest way of creating a material?
Duplicate one.
Duplicating, yes, good. Okay, if you think, okay, well, I want to start a material from absolute scratch, this is the way you would do it. And sometimes I think this is better. I think starting from a blank canvas is probably a better approach than actually inheriting information from an existing. But in duplicating it is a very quick method of getting the material up and running with a few minor changes. So the thing is that with your new material, if you go to the Identity tab, talking about searching materials over here by class, this is where the class is actually set. See the class here? And when you are creating a new material, it's a good idea to actually just have a look at the class list and then pop that material into an appropriate class so that when you are searching, it makes the process, it refines the process and makes it easier to search and manage. By the way, coming back to these icons down here, this one over here on the left, if you were opening an existing library or creating a new one, that's where you would do it. Okay, just down here. So the material and the browser itself, other parts of the browser, I won't go through the whole lot, but there's a drop list here, or an icon here, which changes your view. So you can, and that's basically the way this looks over here. So for instance, if you go down to the bottom here to thumbnail size and choose 64 by 64, it just makes the little icons a lot larger. All right, so you have a degree of customization there. So with your document materials, you can show all of them, show the ones that are in use if you want to, or show any that are unused. And the thing is that I think you've all done Revit Intermediate, haven't you? And in Revit Intermediate, depending on who you had, I mean, I sort of, at the end of Revit Intermediate, I talk about purging families and other entities that are no longer required in a Revit project. Well, the thing is that if a material is not used in a Revit project, it can be purged as well or deleted. Okay, so anything that's currently unused, if you go through the purge process, can be potentially removed from the project itself. So you have to be a bit careful with that, because you don't want to purge all of your unused materials on the basis that you may well want to use them in the future. So just again, just quickly having a look at, I guess, on the right-hand side. By the way, the double arrows down here will open and close the material editor, which is this part on the right-hand side. Okay, so it just reduces it to what I call the browser itself. So if you just want to assign materials and not make any change, not create new ones or make changes to existing, you can just operate like this without the editor. So double arrows here, turns on the editor. So for each material, for instance, we talked about the identity information. So when you're building a material, what we do is we go down and we put in the name of the material, the class or classification, any comments or keywords, and in this area here under product information we can put the manufacturer, the model, the cost, and the web link or URL to the manufacturer's website for that particular product. Revit annotation information, well, keynoting is another way. We can use a process called keynoting to annotate model elements in a project. It's not something that we're going to cover in this particular unit, but it's just another way of doing or providing automatic annotation within View. So as I said, graphics, if we go across to graphics, that controls the shaded appearance of the building element. It also controls the surface pattern and cut pattern if required. The appearance, again, so in this case, this oak flooring is derived, the appearance is derived from a texture map such as this. Now, if you click directly on the texture map, it opens the image up in a texture editor. Now, I guess the creation of a material based on a texture map can be a complete success or a complete failure. Okay, so it's not an easy thing to do, and I guess the thing is that you know, I guess you have to understand how Revit applies materials to understand, I guess, you know, understand fully if this is going to be successful or not. But basically, when we're creating a material based on the texture map, it's a very small photograph or sample of that particular product. And when Revit applies your material to a surface, such as a floor or a wall, what it does is it tiles. Okay, so it repeats this little sample hundreds or thousands of times. So the sample itself is just tiled. It's actually sort of put next to each other, underneath, below. If you have any imperfection in the photograph, if there's any shadowing or any sort of obvious repetition, you'll actually see that when it's actually applied to a larger surface. So it's very difficult. Well, I guess the skill here is to actually, I guess, create or set up the sample, the texture map, in such a way that when it does repeat itself, it looks as though it's continuous. There are no distinct or obvious divisions between each of the little photographs, samples, as it tiles on your surface. So if there's a bit of a shadowing there, that will be repeated, and you'll actually see it in, repeated in your flat surface. When you're creating something like brickwork or stonework, that type of thing, the random materials like stonework are the hardest to actually achieve that sort of flow effect, or that look of continuity. The other important aspect of texture maps in getting the material looking correct when it actually applies or maps is the scale. And quite often students will create a material but will forget completely about the scale. So if you're producing a material based on a standard brick, it's important that you actually get the scale correct, so that when it does map to your brick wall surface, it looks correct. You haven't got little tiny bricks, thousands of little tiny bricks. If you count the bricks, in a standard wall that's 2.4 or 2.7, you should have a set number of bricks in that wall, okay? And if you've got 3 times that amount of bricks, you know that the scale's not correct. So these are the sort of things you've got to do. You've got to create the material, you've got to apply it to a building element and test it and see if it looks credible. So, as I say, not all materials are based on a texture map, and in this case, this one is. So you can see that the scale here is 254mm this way and 254mm this way. So even things like timber need to be scaled correctly as well. Okay, so in this case, this one has both physical and thermal properties as well. All right. And notice that the physical and the thermal both have the red cross here, which means that you can actually remove the asset if you wish. The appearance, you can't, of course. The graphics is the same. These are the defaults. They can't be removed. Now, you can replace what we call the appearance asset. So if you're replicating or duplicating an existing material and you want to change the appearance of it, we actually replace what's known as the appearance asset, which is essentially what you did in the rendering concepts exercise last week. So if you want to change the appearance of this oak flooring, for instance, you would firstly, you could duplicate the appearance asset that's here, or you could replace the asset using this button here. Now, if you're going to replace the appearance asset by clicking this one here, it opens up a second dialog called the Asset Browser. Now, the Asset Browser will allow you to change the appearance asset. And the appearance asset you'll find under the appearance library here. Okay, so depending on what you want to change it to, so if we go down to, or go to, if we've got a flooring there, we've got flooring. Okay, so the flooring category of the appearance library, if we wanted to change the appearance of this flooring in some way, we could actually go down and say, okay, well, let's go with the beechwood cherry. So if you click the double arrows here, the current appearance asset is now swapped out or replaced with the one that I've selected over here. Okay, so you can see that this particular material now has a completely different appearance just by changing what we call the appearance asset. So if you're just working within Revit and working within its, or just using its default appearance assets, then that's all well and good, that's fine, you can do that. But essentially, if you're building a material from scratch, A, it needs identity information, B, it'll need perhaps a cut pattern or a surface pattern assigned. You then go across to the appearance asset and you think, okay, well, depending on what material you're actually creating, you go down, open up the asset browser, go to the appearance library, go down to the appropriate class or category, and then find an appropriate appearance asset to use. And swap it in. So in a very simple sense, that's how you build a material from scratch. Okay, so identity information, graphics, surface and cut pattern, you might assign a colour for shading and then put in an appearance asset and you've built a material. All right. So as I say, in the coming sessions, we're going to go through this process and we'll actually go through it very thoroughly and build up a series of materials. Initially, we're going to have a look at sort of producing some materials for carpet and then go and have a look at creating some materials for paint colours and then having a look at maybe a couple of tile materials and see how we actually create those. Okay, so let's now have a look at the ways in which we assign materials to parts of our building. So any questions so far?
Yeah, when it said, the scale, you said 224 by 224. What does that represent?
Well, that's millimetres.
Yeah, but what is that? So that section of the building we're talking about?
No, it's literally the size of that image that was shown.
So it's not.
Yeah.
It doesn't relate to the building then.
No, if I can just come, I'll just see if I can give you a better example of that. Let's say that I choose masonry. Let's go with brick. Okay, masonry brick brown. This one here. So if I choose that one. And I go to the appearance asset there. Now this material is derived from a texture map, this one here. Now you can see, this is a better example. Now you can see that looking vertically from here up to here, you've got just under 1200 mil. Now, if you then count the number of bricks, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So if this was a standard brick, the brick plus the mortar is what? How high is a standard brick plus mortar? Well, it's actually, the brick itself is what, 76?
76, yeah.
And the mortar is 10, so 86 mil. So what did I say, 12 courses? So 12 by 86. So this is how you do the calculations. And the other way, this way down here, say, okay, well, this is 1,016, and along that distance, I've actually got 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and we've got 2 halves, so 5. So 5 bricks in that distance. And what's the length of a brick? What, 230? 230 plus mortar, 10, 240. So 240 by 5. It's very close, isn't it? Okay. So this is where you sort of working with timber. It's a little bit more difficult with timber, but with bricks like this that you know the exact size of, you can do the calculations, and this is how you actually sort of get your scaling correct. And this is what I would expect you to do if you're actually creating materials like this with a unit product that you know the exact size of. Okay.
So if you go for a timber floor to make it look good, you just put 5,000 by 5,000, because bang, it goes in the room and it just looks like one slab.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, if you're talking about floating floors or timber floors are based on
Slats,
planks, or slats. So you know the thickness of each slat. So that's the critical measurement, is the thickness of the slat or the plank. Now the other I guess if the planks were running vertically, then this dimension would be the critical one. Right. Okay. This one really doesn't matter because they can be infinite. Their length can be infinite, and it's probably better if you make this one much longer, but get this one correct so that the plank sizes are the correct width.
Right. So when we look to sort of download something like this for a library, do we just look for something that's called a texture map, or?
Yeah. I mean, you can Google texture maps, or I would head straight to the manufacturer. If you know the manufacturer of the product, go straight to their website and see what they've got. I'll give you some links to websites that host or have a whole collection of texture maps that you can have a look at. But ultimately, when you're doing this, you're best to actually find the exact representation of the building product.
So what sort of file format are these?
Typically, they could be JPG or PNG as a file extension. They're just photographs. Yeah. So yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit in a later session when you're looking for these sort of things. Yeah. So as I say, scaling is vitally important. So coming back to chapter 4, if we scroll back up again to more or less the beginning, just to here. So we're looking at the ways in which we assign materials. And the 3 primary ways are by category, by element, and by face. Now, when you were assigning materials in the exercise last week, how were you doing it? So the first material that you changed was on the wall of the pool house, wasn't it? So to get to that material, what did you have to do?
Click on the surface.
Yeah, you had to select the wall, didn't you? And then what?
Edit type.
Go into its type properties. Yeah. So that material assignment for that wall is said to be by element. Okay. So generally, or when we assign materials to building element or to parts of the building, we actually assign it to the element. Okay. Now, by element is the best, most comprehensive and quickest way to do it, and is the preferred way. Okay, so that's number one. By category is another way of doing it. By category, I think with the black chrome material that you assign to the framework of the curtain wall in the pool house was assigned by category. Do you recall doing that? So in assigning a material by category, do you remember how you did that or where you went to do it? What part of Revit?
The properties box.
Well, the thing is that if I was to assign a material to this wall I've just selected, if I'm doing it by element, what do I do next? So I've selected the object.
Edit type.
Edit type. Okay. So I then go into the structure, and I eventually find the material. There may not be a material assigned to it, okay? But in this case, there is. So that's fine. I'll come back to that. But if I'm going to assign a material by category, I go to the Manage tab and I go to this button here called Object Styles. Do you remember doing that?
Yeah.
So I think you went down to was it walls? It might have been curtain walls. Yeah, curtain wall mullions. I think that's where you actually assign the material there. So yes, you can assign a material to a category, but I don't recommend it. So in the material column here, of course, we have direct access to the material browser, and of course we can go through and choose a material and assign it through this way. Now, if you scroll down the list here of categories in the current project, you'll see that there's one here called Default Form, and the only category that has a material assigned to it is the topography. So if I assign a material, say to walls here, assign a material to the category of walls, what's going to happen? So potentially every wall in the project is going to take on that material assignment. So does that mean that, is it every wall family and every wall type? Is that what's going to happen? The answer is yes. Yeah. Okay, because we're doing it at a category level, and really it's completely pointless to do that, because ultimately with walls, for instance, you're going to want different materials assigned to different wall types, aren't you? So there's no point in doing it really. You then have to go back to the wall type. So the wall type within the wall family. So we sort of go down to a type level, and the type level is by element. Okay, so type is element. Now, what I'm going to get you to do may seem a little odd, but I'm going to get you now to actually assign the same material to every category in the project. And to do that, we have a button here called Select All. Okay, which selects every category, every subcategory in the project. Now, if you then pick one of the categories, it doesn't matter which one, and click over here, where I am here, and click again, it opens up the material browser. And we're going to go for a fairly bright colour so that we can sort of see it quite clearly. And we're going to go for a very bright fluorescent yellow. All right. And the material that I'm thinking of is one called parking stripe. Okay, so it's a material used for, you know, drawing or painting lines on a road that's bright yellow. So just do a search for parking and choose this material here called parking stripe. So you can see the shaded colour is this very bright yellow. So OK that. So it's now assigned that material to all categories. All right, everyone following? Okay. So click OK on that one. And OK. Now, by the way, there may be very, very few examples or situations where you'd actually assign a material by category. And I guess the only real example that I can think of is if you're going to assign a material to a railing type, for instance, and railings are sort of made up of a lot of different components, and it's sometimes difficult to actually drill down into the family list and find all the different parts of a railing system to actually assign a material to those parts. So sometimes it's you're going for maybe going for the quickest method possible, and you might think, okay, well, I'll just go into object styles, I'll find railings. Okay, I don't care if every railing in the project takes on this particular material, because I'm only using one railing type, and I'll just do a blanket material assignment that way. Okay, so that would be the only time I would do it. Now, here we've now assigned this yellow, this bright yellow, to all categories, all types in the project, and I'll get you to shade the view now and have a look at the result. Okay, so you can see that some parts of the model are now bright yellow and others are not. Just go with, I'll just change to consistent colours so you can see that a little bit clearer. So is everyone okay with that? What I'll get you to do, we're not going to complete this little exercise today. We'll go a certain way with it, but I'll need to probably finish it off next session. So I will get you to, you know, save as we go, and obviously retain this file for use in our next session. All right, so why are some aspects or some parts of this model yellow and others not?
It's because they're family, or
No, it's not to do with the
Shade.
family.
Because of shade, the roof.
No, it's not to do with shading. So I guess it comes back to, okay, we've now changed all categories to yellow, this yellow colour. And by the way, if you wanted to present a model in one colour, all one colour, such as white, that's quite a good presentation technique. Now, why would we do that? Why would we actually sort of change the whole model to a single colour like white? And I guess the answer is, I mean, because we want to maybe present it in some way. Has anyone ever built a model out of foam core? Okay, some of you may. Foam core is just a white, thin white material that's used to actually build a physical model. So we could perhaps present our virtual or our Revit model in all white to sort of represent like an architectural foam core model, just for a concept design, for instance, perhaps. Given that we're not going to specify colours or textures at this stage, just purely from a design point of view. And we can use the by category method to do that quite quickly. Now the thing is that in this case, not all parts of this model are yellow. So, and I guess the question is why. But I'll come back to that shortly. And I thought I'm just going to digress slightly and show you a rendering that I did yesterday of this particular building. And this is what I'm getting at. Okay, so this is the same model, but all parts of it are white, apart from the glass in the curtain wall. Now this was done in the rendering software that I mentioned last week called Enscape. So when you load up, and Enscape is a plugin for Revit, and when you load the model up into this Enscape software, initially it looks like this, and you can actually, if there are materials assigned to it, you can actually change one of the settings and have a look at the view with materials assigned, or you can change a setting and change it to this white look, or it's actually called, it's a setting called white for presentation. And it automatically puts the sky in if you want to, and it automatically puts in the buildings in the background there. Okay, so as you can see, it's quite a nice view for presentation purposes. All right, so this is this is one of the reasons why perhaps you would, if you were just using Revit, that you would use that by category to actually change all of your building elements to a single colour. For presentation. So I just thought I'd show you that one. I mean, if I'm talking about foam core models, I mean, just to give you an example, that's what I was sort of referring to as a foam core model. So, if you've ever studied architecture, or if you've been an architectural student, you might have done this at uni perhaps, or you might have done it in, as a student here. I don't think we have any requirement to do it here, but some of you may have done it, or used this particular foam core product to construct a model like that. Now, getting back to our Revit project, why are some of these objects not yellow? Well, having a look at this a retaining wall here, for instance, if I go back to, or go into its type properties, and its structure, you'll see that it has a material assigned to it through its type properties. Now, if an element or an object has a material assigned to it, and you want to remove that assignment from that object, you still click here in the material column, in the cell here, and click again and open up the material browser. Now, if you want to remove a material assignment, in this case from this column, the button down here, lower left-hand corner, this one here called by category, will set the material assignment to what we call by category, and in effect it will actually remove the current assignment. So what we're saying is, okay, well, for this particular element and type, we're saying, okay, well, we're removing the material assigned to it, but in doing that, we're actually saying we're reverting the material now to the by category option. And what have we currently set the by category to for walls? Yellow. Okay. So what will happen when I click OK? Hoping it'll go yellow. It does. Okay.
So is by type the same as by element?
Yes. Yeah, by type and by element is really the same thing. So when we say we're assigning material by element, we do it through the type properties. So we're assigning it to a type. So the type, in this case, it's a type of wall that belongs to a family of walls. Okay, the family belongs to a category. So we're sort of looking at a hierarchy. Okay, category is the broadest type of material assignment. We then go down to type, which is more specific. So that's per type. And there is a third type of material assignment, which is by face. Having said that, if you have the category, if you have a material assigned to the category, which is yellow in this case, if you then select a type, so a type of wall, for instance, or it could even be the roof, select the roof and go into its type properties, into its structure, and here, rather than by category, click here, open up the browser and choose a specific material and click OK. So there's now a material assigned to it. It's no longer by category, and click OK and OK. If I change that to realistic, you'll see that the roof is no longer yellow. It's now taken on that material. So what we're saying is that the roof category is set to yellow. However, I've gone into the roof type and I've assigned a new material, and the material I've assigned to the type overrides the category. Okay? So anything, any object in this current view that is not yellow has a material assigned by type or by element, and that overrides the category. So we're talking about a hierarchy. Okay. Now the thing is that, as I said, when you're working on your assessment tasks, there won't be any requirement, or you won't be required to actually assign materials by category. You'll do it all through type.
So that hierarchy, categories at the bottom, is it?
Yes.
Then you get type.
Categories at the bottom. Yeah. Category, then category is overridden by type, and the third type of assignment overrides type. So, and the third type of assignment, let's say that I go back to this column here, and I go back in and change that to what it was, which was the concrete. Okay, so that's no longer yellow because I've now assigned a material directly to the type, the concrete. So it now takes on that material appearance. Now there's a third type of material assignment called by face, and you'll find that up here on the Modify tab, and on the Geometry panel here. Now it's actually called Paint. So see the icon here. So we've got Modify, we've got Geometry, and we've got this option here called Paint and Remove Paint. Now what painting does is applies a material to the face of an element. So if I click Paint, it opens up this sort of, I guess, reduced version of the material browser, and it gives me a list of, or a collection of all of the current materials in the project. Okay, so if you're going to apply a material by face, by painting, it has to be in this list first. So there's no provision or no way that you can actually load in a new material from an external source during this process unless you do it beforehand. Okay, so you have to have the materials ready to go before you actually start painting. So if, for instance, I wanted to paint part of this column here, or this retaining wall, with a different material, let's see, let's go with masonry brick. Select that one, and then just click the surface. It will change the material or paint the face of that particular object with a new material, the one I've selected. So this is called applying a material by face. And you'll see that when you paint a surface, it overrides the material that's assigned by type, and the material that's assigned by type overrides the material assigned by category, if there is one. Okay, so it goes from yellow to concrete and now to a brick face. Right. Now the thing is that, I can assign a different material. So if I go to, let's say, masonry brick brown, I can then put a different material on the front face or the side of this particular wall. I can actually paint all parts of that particular wall with a different material if I want to. Okay, so that's painting. So you've got the three types of assignment: by category, by element, and by face. So in the assessment task, I would expect you to do the majority of your assignment by element, that being the quickest, and then if you need to, do a little bit of assignment by face, depending on the situation or the circumstance. So this particular building is probably perfect, or is a perfect example of where you would actually assign a material to the upper walls by element, and then perhaps use a process of by face or painting to change the inside appearance of the walls. I'll explain that a little. We'll just have a look at that a little bit in a clearer sense. But at the moment, just to show you how that the painting process works. Now, the thing is that if you paint a surface, or if you see the surface of an object different colours like this or different materials, it's more than likely, well, it is obviously done by painting. Now, if you want to remove the paint, okay, if you've painted something, you want to remove it, you can use this option here. If you're not sure what has been applied to the surface, you can click Paint again, and if you just mouse over the surface, Revit will tell you what it's been painted with, if it has been painted, and what it has been painted with. Okay, so it actually tells you. So if you're not sure what it is and you want to actually paint other surfaces with the same material, at least that way you know what it is. So if you then want to remove it, just choose the Remove Paint option and then click, and it'll go back to whatever material was assigned through type, or whatever material was assigned by category. So again, if I go into the type properties of that and I then set the material to by category, it'll go back to yellow. Okay, does that make sense? But at this stage, I would say forget about by category. Okay, just by type or painting are the two preferred methods of material assignment. Now, what I'd like to do here is, with this particular model, I'd like you to assign a material. I know that the upper walls here and the walls here, now these are a basic wall, generic 200. Now, because they are a sort of an off-white colour, it would indicate that they have a material assigned to them by type. But what I'd like you to do now is actually assign another material, is replace the current material with another more appropriate material for masonry, for brickwork. Okay, so just quickly do that. So any of these walls here that are an off-white colour, just assign a different material by type. No, so when you're doing this, don't forget here with your class, with your project materials, if you're looking for you know, masonry, you can sort of do a search by class, or if you want to choose brick, there's a couple of brick materials there. Otherwise, you can do a general search up here. Now, let's say that we want to have a look at the interior space of this building, and we want to have a look at what's going on with the walls inside the building itself. Now, a technique that I would recommend using to get inside the building very quickly, because we are working with walls, a technique of actually, I guess, turning all other categories off apart from the walls is a very useful one in getting inside the building very quickly. anyone know how to do that? Sorry? Yeah, you can do it. You can do it through visibility graphics. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, so use filter to select.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, yeah. So if you were to select the entire building or the entire project, you could use a filter. So yeah, that's very good suggestion. Yeah. So if we use it, select filter and then click check none, and then go down and just tick walls and do it that way. That will select the walls only. That's the filter will select the walls, but what we want to do is actually turn off all of the other objects, all the other categories, or effectively hide them temporarily. Now, what I was getting at is, and probably the quickest technique or the quickest way of doing that is to do something called isolate category. Okay, isolate category. Any ideas how we do that? Very quickly. So at the bottom of your screen, down on the view controls down here, you've got the set of glasses called temporary hide isolate, and you've got hide category or isolate category, isolate element or hide element. Now, if you want to isolate a category, what you do is you select one of the objects that's part of that category, such as one of the walls, and then select and choose isolate category. Okay, so this is a really useful technique for a lot of reasons, but in this case, if you actually want to get inside the building and have a look at what's going on with the walls, with a view to actually, I guess, assigning a material to the walls internally, this is a very quick way of doing it. Now, in assigning a material to the type properties of those walls, what's happened?
On the inside as well.
Yeah, so the material appears on the inside of the wall, the inside of the external walls, and it also appears on the internal walls because they are the same wall type. So why is that?
There's only one structure. One.
Yeah, so it's the wall type itself, or the type itself, only has one layer. Okay, only has one layer to it. So that when you assign a material by type, the material is applied to both sides of the wall, top and bottom, and both ends, all parts of the wall. Now the thing is that when you're working with these wall types, you might encounter this issue. So you think, okay, well, I want brick on the outside, and I want another material on the inside. Or maybe I want to paint the inside with a solid colour. So the way to approach this is to think, okay, well, the quickest way to assign a material for the external purposes is to do it through type. Agreed? If I then want to change the colour of the internal faces, how do I do it? You paint them. Okay, so this would be a classic example of where you would actually use the paint or the assigning a material by face. Now, just on that, when you are painting by face, you can only do so with families that are known as system families. Does everyone know what I mean by system?
Whether it's plumbing, electrical, masonry, or
No. If we're defining families, grouping families into, and I guess this comes back to the primary function of families and the initial learning within Revit as to what a family is and how it behaves. Families are divided up into three areas. There are system, there are loadable families, and the third one, does anyone know what the third family group is, or the way that we create families? In place, yes, in place is the answer. So we can actually build a family within a project, that's an in place. But system families are families that you cannot load into a project. So system families are in a project. They are there. They've got there somehow, but they don't actually. They're not put into a project or brought into a project through a process of loading. Now, examples of system families would be walls, roofs, ceilings, things like gutters and fascias. These are all families that are sort of hard-coded into the project or template. Loadable families are component families that we can actually click load family, go off to a folder or a library, and then actually physically load a family into a project. So getting back to painting, it's only possible to paint a system family. So that being a wall face or a roof face or a ceiling or a floor, for instance. Okay. Now, when you are assigning materials in your assessment tasks, please try and do it through the type properties of the walls. Okay. The only reason that you would paint a wall face is if you had the facade of a building where you may want most of the walls to be brick, but you may want a feature like a one face to be a feature, a different material. Okay, please don't paint your entire building with the face option. Do it through type properties. Okay, painting is very tedious because you've actually got to click on every surface. And also things like roofs. Don't paint your roof surfaces. Apply the material through the type properties of that particular roof type. Now, why I say that is because students have done that in the past. They've gone ahead and painted all their individual surfaces, which is not necessary. Okay, so do it through type properties or by element. Okay, so in this case, if I want to change the colour of the internal walls or the material assigned, I do it through painting. It's the only option I have. Okay, so if I go up to here to paint and choose paint, and I'll just choose a fairly neutral colour in this case. Now I think in fact I'll just choose finish because I think that's the material that's assigned typically to timber framing, just as a neutral colour. So the idea is that you select the material that you want to paint with, but don't click done, don't close this dialog, just choose the material and then come over and then click on the surfaces. Okay, just move that across. So it's very quick to do. and made much easier by isolating the category so that we can get inside okay. Now you all know, you're all okay with sort of moving around the model. Do you know how I'm doing this at the moment? Holding the shift key down and holding the mouse wheel down and then just moving the mouse. So shift key held down. If you select an object, I'll just close that for the moment. If you select an object in the model itself, like that, and you hold your shift key down and click your mouse and rotate around, what happens is that the model will actually rotate around the object you've selected. Okay, so if you've got a big model and you're finding it hard to sort of move around and it's a bit clunky, just choose something in the center of the model and then rotate around it like that. It makes it easier to get around. This one's okay because it's not too big. Okay, so yes.
I just have a question about the system families. So if we draw in the walls that are not system family, we do.
All right. So what I'll get you to do, we haven't quite finished with this particular exercise. The only other thing that I want to talk about with this particular exercise is to do with painting by face. But I'll just quickly cover that in our next session, and then we'll move on and start having a look at creating materials. So at this point, can I just get you to go down to your little icon at the bottom, temporary hide isolate, and do a reset. So reset. Now, by the way, when you want to isolate a category, now whether it be walls or roof or windows or whatever category, when you select the object, you know how Revit has shortcuts? Okay, the shortcut for isolate category is IC. So if you select an object in Revit and type IC, it will isolate the category. Now this is a temporary situation. If you want to reset and bring back all your other categories, as we just did, the shortcut for that is HR, which is hide reverse. Okay, so IC isolate category, HR hide reverse. So these are a couple of quick techniques that you can use as you're working with your models. So just save this particular project and we'll have a look. We'll just finish this off in our next session. So just hang on to it till next week and we'll have a look at it then. So unless there's any questions, we'll conclude at this point. So thanks everyone. We'll see you next week.